I'm going to introduce our speaker here, Brian. He's from Getaround. Brian is the city manager for Chicago for Getaround. Getaround, for those of you who don't know, is a rapidly expanding car sharing service that has often been described as the Airbnb for cars. Getaround currently has over 20,000 users and over 200 cars just in the greater Chicago area. He's responsible for all local marketing operations and personnel. Prior to Getaround, Brian worked for 2 Chicago-based startups, Grubhub and Whittle. He is a BA from the University of Michigan and an MBA from Chicago Booth. Please put your hands together and welcome Brian, our speaker.
Thanks for that great introduction. Thanks for having me here. It's great to see you all. Hope you're enjoying the food. I guess I'll speak for hopefully probably around 20 to 30 minutes, somewhere in there, probably on the lower side. And then I want to really open it up for your questions. I want this to be about what you want to hear and not what I want to tell you. So think of questions as you go. Stephen told me you can either text them into this system you guys have, or you can go old school and just raise your hand and we'll get you a mic. So one thing, I'll put this up again at the end, but just so you know, if you go to that URL right at the bottom there, no www, you got $50 driving credit to try Getaround. That's the biggest promo we give, so definitely check that out. And if you have a car, we generally have a $99 setup fee, but if you come talk to me at this event, we'll waive that for you. So this will go up again at the end. I wouldn't be a good startup employee unless I tried to get every little sign up that I could, so that's my shameless plug to you. So I guess to get started here, and I'll leave this up while I do this poll, who's heard of car sharing? So not ride sharing, like Uber and Lyft, but car sharing. If you want to just raise your hands. All right, so a good number. And what about Getaround? Who's heard of Getaround so far? Smaller group. Well, good. Everyone will be able to raise their hands at the end of the talk, and I'll have at least done one thing right. So Getaround, as Stephen told you, is like Airbnb for cars. People in the city of Chicago that have cars but that don't use them a lot can rent it out to other people in this city that don't have cars a lot but need a car. Getaround always covers every rental with $1 million insurance policy. That insurance policy covers the car, the owner, and the renter. After all, most renters don't have cars, and if you don't have a car, you don't have car insurance. So Getaround covers it, and it's actually included in the price that you pay. So you don't pay anything extra to be covered by our insurance. The average price of a car in Chicago is $7.50 per hour, though you can find cars in the city as low as $5 an hour. You can rent cars on Getaround by the hour, by the day, or by the week. So you can rent it for an hour to go run a few errands. You could rent it for a few hours to go to IKEA. You could rent it for a weekend trip to Michigan. We don't have any membership fees, no monthly fees, no annual fees. So renting on Getaround, you can rent once in a while. You can rent once and never rent again. We like all business at this point. Maybe the coolest part about Getaround is that you don't actually meet the owner to get the key. Even though Getaround doesn't own a single car, they're all owned by people in Chicago. We install technology into every single one of our Getaround cars so that you, as a renter, could unlock my car on Getaround with your cell phone. It's literally an unlock and a lock button that shows up on your cell phone. You hit unlock, about 5 seconds later, the car door opens. The key is in the car. You turn the car on, and you're ready to go. And so the first time you ever sign up for Getaround, we do have to do some driving record checks and verify your identity, and it can take up to 48 hours. But after that, you can rent on Getaround instantly anytime you want. If you want to rent a car, at even 1 minute before your time started, you could do that. You rent the car on our app or on the computer, you walk up to the car, you unlock it, keys in the car, and you're ready to go. So, why does Getaround exist? Well, we exist for a lot of reasons, but this is a crazy stat. Basically, most cars sit on the street or in a garage all day. In the United States alone, there's 6 billion daily unused car hours. Why is this? Because people either aren't using their cars that much, or they're commuting to work. They're driving for maybe an hour, they're leaving their car for 8 hours, they're driving for another hour, and the car sits all night. And so part of our mission at Getaround is to reduce this number. There's car overpopulation. Obviously in big cities it's felt the most. I live in Lakeview with zone parking. It's still very hard to find a parking spot. We want to reduce the number of cars out there, and car sharing is one of the ways that's going to reduce that. So in any two-sided, so Getaround is a two-sided marketplace. You can think of it like Grubhub, if you're familiar with Grubhub, or like Airbnb. We have owners on the one side. Owners are the ones that actually own the car, and we have renters on the other side that are renting the car. Anytime you're involved in a business in a two-sided marketplace like this, the safety and trust factor is huge, and that's no exception in Getaround's case. We have a bunch of features that try to address this. The first one is what we call Trust Rank. This is a proprietary algorithm that takes all the information that you give us, including payment information, your driving record, because we check everyone's driving record before they can rent on Getaround, and we have a proprietary algorithm that figures out and tries to make sure you are who you say you are based on a ton of various factors to try and keep our community safe. We also have vehicle inspection. So before a vehicle is onboarded on Getaround, it's inspected. We make sure that nothing is wrong with it. We also note any pre-existing damage that's on the car, and that keeps the vehicles that you're driving safe. For a vehicle to be active on Getaround, it has to be newer than 2005 and less than 125,000 miles. That's also another way, but the inspections are key. If there are issues, it doesn't mean the car can't go on Getaround, but we will ask the owner to fix them before we can allow the car on the platform, because if cars aren't safe, our renters aren't safe. Additionally, before you actually get into the Getaround car and start driving it, we'll prompt you on the app to fill out an inspection. And so this is another way we keep everything safe. We'll ask you to actually do a 360 inspection around the car, to take a look, to note and take pictures of damage on your phone that automatically get sent to us, and to note if the car is dirty, etc. And the purpose of this is, one, to make sure the cars are safe to be driven, there aren't any safety concerns, and also it's to protect the renter, because we want to make sure that you note any damage that you see on the car so that there's no issues later on. The third thing that we do is peer-to-peer feedback. And this is what most companies that are in two-sided marketplaces are already doing. So owners, after every trip, get to say whether they trust or they don't trust or they're not sure on the renter. And this is part of the way we keep our communities safe. If renters are doing things that they're not supposed to, which is rare, but it happens, this is a way for owners to let us know. It automatically, their notes get sent to our 24-hour customer service team, and we can review everything. On the user side, it's the same. You'll rate your trip after every trip, both on the quality of the car and the quality of your trip. We use that feedback to improve the quality of cars. For example, if we note that 2 people in a row said a car was dirty, we'll reach out to the owner and say, hey, we've gotten some notes that your car is dirty. Here's the pictures they sent. Do you mind just taking it to get a car wash before the next person comes in, or taking your personal stuff out of the car, whatever it might be. And so it's feedback from our community, both on the renter and the owner side, is absolutely critical to building a strong two-sided marketplace. And those are some of the things that we're doing to make that happen. So here's the goal. What you see behind me, every one of those purple dots is a car in San Francisco. If you see 3 dots, it means we actually have multiple cars within a couple feet of each other. In San Francisco right now, actually we just announced an acquisition yesterday, and with that acquisition, we're well over 2,000 cars. You can basically find a car on every single block in San Francisco. And that's where we're going to in Chicago, but we're not there yet. Right now in Chicago, as Stephen announced before, we have over 200 cars, so we're getting there, and we have 20,000 users. But our goal is to have a car in every block, because what we found is people generally don't want to walk more than 3 blocks to a car. And in Chicago, we're not there yet, but ultimately we want to get there, and then we want to, once we're there, go down to every single block in the city. In addition to Chicago and San Francisco, just for general knowledge, we're also in DC and Portland, and more cities to come next year. So if you're moving to other cities and you're really hoping Getaround's going to get there, you might not have to wait too much longer. So let's talk a little bit about a broader landscape of car sharing and actually transportation in general. And so what you can see here is we've broken transportation into kind of 4 buckets. The first bucket is the 0 to 30 minute. This is owned by Uber and Lyft. The second bucket is car sharing, where you can rent actually by the hour. Zipcar, Getaround, Enterprise Car Share. There are a number of others now. car rental, which is when you can rent for 24 hours to a month, which Getaround is also in with a variety of other competitors, and I'll talk about some of the differences in a minute. And the fourth is kind of your traditional car rental, renting from Hertz. Some of the companies on here are actually allowing you to rent your car to Uber and Lyft drivers by the day or by the week or by the month. And so this is kind of the whole landscape. One thing that people often ask, and it may be in your heads right now, is Lyft and Uber a competitor to Getaround? And the answer might surprise you. The answer is absolutely not. In fact, it's a complement. Uber and Lyft help us. And here's why. Generally, Uber and Lyft is fantastic if A, you're drinking, B, you're taking short trips. You generally want to take an Uber trip of less than 30 minutes by and large. If you want to go out to the suburbs to visit your family, that Uber and Lyft ride is going to be very, very expensive. And if you want to take a trip to Michigan, it's really going to be expensive. It might be as expensive as a flight, potentially. And so Uber and Lyft actually enable Getaround to be successful with public transit. So when we're looking to enter a new city, we're looking at things like, does it have good public transit? Are people able to commute to and from work pretty easily? Do they have a great Uber and Lyft presence? Are people able to get short distances for very, very cheap prices? And that's where Getaround comes in, is a third component. For people that want to take a trip of over 30 minutes, if you want to have errands with multiple stops, if you need to go to the suburbs, you need to go to IKEA, or you need to take a vacation to a neighboring city. My car, actually, that I rent on Getaround was actually taken for a week to Memphis, Tennessee. So our cars end up all over the country, even though we're only in 4 cities. And so that's kind of the how ride sharing is a complement to us. On the car sharing side, I'm going to talk a little bit about how we're different than some of our competitors. And don't get me wrong, the competitors I'm talking about, I'm really talking about the differences. Zipcar is an excellent company. In fact, we like to say that if Zipcar didn't exist, Getaround would have never existed because it opened an entirely new segment of car sharing. We've just taken it to the next level with peer-to-peer car sharing. And some of the other competitors too. I'm just saying the differences. These are great companies. And I just want to compare and contrast how they differ. So Zipcar is the first. Zipcar is very similar to Getaround from a renter standpoint. You walk up to a Zipcar, they used to have a card. I think now most of their cars are enabled with cell phones. Some of the differences, though, is Getaround doesn't have a membership fee. So we don't need you to be using Getaround all the time. We don't want to have you to pay monthly or annual fees. You can rent Getaround once, or you can rent Getaround once a week. You never pay any fees. Additionally, for Getaround, for Zipcar, we also have a much wider variety of cars. So some people want to rent SUVs. Some people want to rent pickup trucks, or even those white vans for moving things. You might want a convertible. We have all of these options in Chicago. And you can get in Chicago, unfortunately, we don't have Teslas yet. We have about 10 Teslas in San Francisco. We will get Teslas soon. We're working with several owners to try and get those on. But you can rent all sorts of cars at all sorts of price points. Another big advantage to Getaround is we're generally, not always, but generally, depending on the car, cheaper than Zipcar. So if you're to compare a Toyota Camry on Zipcar or Getaround, you're generally going to get a better deal on Zipcar. Furthermore, Zipcar jacks their rates on the weekends, and Getaround does not. So on the weekends, certainly, you're going to have a good deal on Getaround. So that's the difference between us and Zipcar. I want to talk about another big competitor of ours that's doing some really cool stuff, and they're actually in more cities. So if you're in a city that Getaround's not in, you can look into this competitor. They're called Turo, T-U-R-O. They used to be called Relay Rides. Some of you might have been familiar when that was their name. And they do something very similar to Getaround. It is peer-to-peer, so they don't own any cars. Other people are renting their cars out to, just like they are on Getaround. But the difference is Getaround focuses on technology, and we believe the way of the future is technology. We don't think you and I want to meet to exchange keys. We think technology is the way of the future. Turo has decided they think actually meeting people face-to-face is the way of the future. Time will tell who's right, but it's one difference. Because of that difference, on Getaround, you can rent for 1 single hour. So you could rent the average car in Chicago for $7.50. On Turo, you have to rent for an entire day. So you can't rent by the hour. And the reason is because owners really don't want to meet up with renters and go out of their way to meet people if they're only going to be renting the car for an hour. On Getaround, we encourage shorter trips. You don't actually have to rent for an entire day. One other difference between Turo is that Getaround really focuses, and this is more of a business decision, on finding pockets of very dense cities like Chicago, San Francisco, DC, and really trying to build a strong presence in those cities. Turo's model is they'll go anywhere. So Turo is all over this country. I don't know how many cities they're in. I would guess it's at least 25 different cities. Some cities might only have 5 cars. That doesn't matter to them. So if you're going to be in a city, not one of the ones Getaround's in, Turo might be an option that you should look into if peer-to-peer car sharing is something that excites you. And then, how are we different than traditional rent-a-car companies? In Lakeview, not far from where I live, there is a Hertz rental car place. So how are we different than them? One, we can rent by the hour. I don't want to sound like a broken record. But another big thing is, I don't know how often you guys rent cars, but if you go on a vacation and rent one, there's a lot of paperwork. It takes like 20 minutes, 15 minutes to fill out all this paperwork. Then you have to meet with the people at the desk, and they try and upsell you on millions of different features. It's confusing what insurance you get, what insurance don't you get, what insurance you already have. And also in Lakeview, for example, though not at the airports, you can't return the cars whenever you want. You might only be able to return the cars 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. And so some of the differences on Getaround is our process is much more seamless. While we do have a review process the first time you ever rent that can take 48 hours, actually signing up for a Getaround and booking your first trip, you can do the whole thing in 5 minutes. There's no complications with insurance. You're always getting our $1 million insurance policy. And you can drop off and pick up cars whenever you want. If you were going on a road trip and you need to pick up a car at 5 a.m., you can do that. If you want to drop it off at midnight when you get home, you can do that. And so there's no limitations that you have when you're renting a Getaround car. So there's a lot of underlying missions that people are excited about as an employee at Getaround. Some people are very excited about the environmental impact that car sharing can have. Some people are very excited about the sharing economy, utilizing assets a lot better than we're utilizing them today, whether that's your house with Airbnb or your car with Getaround. And some people are just passionate about cars. But their environmental impact is real. We've done a study with University of California in Berkeley, and what they found is for every 1,000 people in a city who share their car, we can actually take 10,000 cars off the road. It offsets 100 million pounds of carbon, and it injects about $10 million into the local neighborhood. And in San Francisco, we already have 2,000 cars. So that's potentially taking 20,000 cars off the road. And in addition to the environmental focus, it's good because parking in San Francisco, if we think it's bad in Chicago, you should hear how they complain to me about parking in San Francisco. It is a disaster. Parking, you could easily pay $400 a month for a parking spot in San Francisco. And in Chicago, we think it's pretty bad that you have to pay $200 or $220. Their street parking is far worse than ours. And unlike Chicago, where there still are some zones of zone-free parking where you can go for free, in San Francisco, that doesn't even exist. And so it has a huge impact on cities, and that's part of what we do when we go into a city is trying to have good relationships with the city itself to see how we can work together to reduce the number of cars that we have on the roads and allow more people to share cars. So I want to talk a little bit about a couple things that aren't in the slides. One is partnerships. We have a partnership with an organization in Chicago called SumC, which is the Shared Use Mobility Center. And they've given us a fairly large grant about a year and a half ago. It's a 2-year program, so we're coming up on the end of the program. And what we're doing is we're trying to study car sharing in some areas where traditional car rental doesn't work, which is lower income areas, lower density areas, and closed networks. And when I say closed network, we're really looking at what it's like when you're in one single high-rise building. And so can you create a network where you get 1 or 2 cars in that building and then 5 or 6 or 10 renters and see how that progresses. So the results are outstanding. We're still working on them. But I think it's really interesting. Right now, if you live in a lower density area or a lower income area, there's really not many car sharing options for you or car rental options at all. And we think that there has to be a way to go into those markets and add value to those communities. And through this pilot is one of the ways that we're trying to figure it out. Density is the same thing. Lower density areas, if you think of a suburb like Skokie or even Evanston, it's harder for car sharing traditionally to work in lower density areas because you need more cars. If you're trying to get to 1 car for every 3 blocks and it's a really non-dense area, you need a lot more cars, and that's why it's traditionally underserved. And so we're trying to figure out if there's an opportunity for us to go into those neighborhoods and add value. Another partnership that was just announced last week, I believe, is Toyota recently invested financially in Getaround. And while the figure was not disclosed, it was leaked in the Japanese media, so you can find out how much it was just by a simple Google for Getaround and Toyota. But in addition to that, we have two really unique partnership deals we're working on that are going to show partially the future of car sharing and how we're going to continue to increase and innovate in the space. The first is, right now, while you can unlock the doors with your cell phone, you still need a key to start the car. And we think that should change. You shouldn't need keys anymore. And so we have a deal we just announced with Toyota. We're going to investigate keyless cars completely. So not only through Getaround will you be able to unlock the car with your phone, you'll be able to start it. So this is brand new. There's going to be a pilot starting in January, so not far away, in San Francisco. Assuming things go well, and you never know exactly how things are going to go or how long it's going to take, this will be something that will hopefully be rolled out across all of our markets. So that's a cool thing that's coming. That's not only more convenient, but because sometimes owners or renters forget, you're not used to leaving the key in the car. You sometimes forget, and you take the key with you. It solves that problem. It's better for safety and security of the vehicles, and it's kind of a cool feature. So that's some stuff that we're working on with Toyota. Another really cool thing that got announced, also going to be piloted in San Francisco with Toyota, is we have you're going to be able to lease or buy a car from a Toyota dealership and actually pay your car payment through Getaround earnings. And so if you, let's say you lease a 2016 Toyota Corolla for $250 a month. If your car gets rented out and you earn more than $250 a month, that money is automatically transferred to Toyota to pay off your payment, and you get everything that's left. Of course, if your car doesn't get rented out that much, or if you happen to use it more in a month, you pay the difference. But it's really lowering the barriers to allowing people that couldn't afford or didn't want to own a car before to own a car and really simply pay for it through earnings of renting it out. This is, again, a pilot in San Francisco that will hopefully get rolled out to all of our markets eventually, but it's some of the things that are on the horizon for us. So I'm just going to touch on a little bit of what I think the future of car sharing is, and then I really want to roll it out to your questions and talk and answer and discuss what you guys think about car sharing and Getaround and transportation innovation in general. But a couple of things I want to mention is one thing that I think that some of our competitors already do, and I think it's going to become a bigger deal in car sharing, is delivery. So right now, you have to have a car within a couple blocks of you in order for you to want to use Getaround. You're generally not going to walk a mile or take an Uber 2 miles to a Getaround car. But one day, you will actually be able to tell, just like you call an Uber to your house, you'll be able to call a Getaround or something else to your house or to the airport or to anywhere else you want. And so I think this is where we're going. Turo, our competitor that I talked about earlier, they actually allow the owners already to deliver cars for an added fee. And so this already exists today, and I think this is going to increase in size in the whole industry, not Getaround specific, but in the whole industry. Ultimately, our vision for car sharing is that people won't need to own cars. Now, is car ownership going to go away forever? Definitely not. Some people love driving their car. They don't want to share their car. I think that will be around forever, or at least decades to come. But our goal is to make it easier for people, especially in big cities, to be able to live without cars. You have great public transit. You have Uber and Lyft. Getaround's another option where you can share cars when you need one. So I think, this is my personal opinion now, not speaking on behalf of Getaround, but even 20 years from now, most people in cities I do not think will own cars. And leads into the final discussion point that we can talk about more if you're interested in, is autonomous vehicles. This is something that's coming quicker than we think. There's definitely governmental regulation that's likely going to slow it down. The technology is fairly good. You can already find pilots of Uber driving autonomous vehicles in San Francisco and in Pittsburgh, and there may even be other cities. You'll see them. There's crazy like spinning devices on top of the car. Tesla has announced that their vehicles are going to get more and more autonomous over the years, and so I think it's going to be an exciting time. I guess I'll end with this. I think, I don't want to say commit to how many years from now, but not that many years into the future, I see a world where living in a city, I wouldn't own a car. If I wanted to take a trip, for example, to Ann Arbor, Michigan, which is where I went to school for a football game, I could easily see renting a car and driving it to Ann Arbor on Friday afternoon. But then on Friday afternoon, I'm not using the car again until Sunday afternoon when I'm leaving. I can easily envision a world where I would flip a switch on that car, and that car would autonomously start picking up Uber and Lyft drivers in Ann Arbor until I'm ready to go, and then it will be ready at my hotel when I'm ready to take it back. Or, while I'm gone, it might be rented by someone else in Ann Arbor that needs a car for a day, but not longer than Sunday afternoon. They'll rent my car. And in this way, I think you'll see the utilization of vehicles really increase. They're not going to be sitting as much, and I think it's a pretty cool future. So with that, I'd love to open it up to your questions and your discussion, and we can open this up. And I don't have to be the only one speaking, but people can give their opinions too, and we can all discuss.
Yeah, what kind of steps have you taken to guard against hacking attempts?
Yeah, so the question, could everyone hear that, is what steps do you take to prevent people from hacking the system? One is we have a very sophisticated development team in San Francisco working on top-notch security measures to prevent that from happening. And we definitely don't discuss what those are. We also have some features built into the product to prevent things if things did go wrong, to proactively be able to take action. We also, just to give you a sense of some of the technology that's built into the system, let's say that I rent Stefan's car and I don't return it on time and I'm running late. Our system will automatically detect that the car is not near its home location. It will ping our 24/7 customer service department, we call it customer happiness, and then they'll call Stefan and say, hey, what's going on? Maybe it was I'm running late, the traffic's bad, or whatever, and we can extend it. But there's a lot of technology built in, mostly proactively, to deal with the issue, and the dev team in San Francisco is working diligently because you can't have people hacking into things like this. So those are some of the things we're doing.
What about if something happens to the vehicle while the renter is driving it? Do you guys provide roadside assistance?
Good question, yes. So in addition to our insurance that would cover if something happened in trip, we also provide 24/7 roadside assistance. During business hours, we actually have fleet associates that work for us that can go around and help renters or owners out. After hours, we have a relationship with tow truck companies. So yeah, it's 24 hours. You can call Getaround, and we can always help you out. Just going to the next level, if I could add a little bit more to your question, we also use those, what we call fleet associates, which is our team shuttling cars around, to help owners. So for example, if you wanted to list your car on Getaround, we don't make you take it to get an inspection. We don't make you take it to get the technology installed. We do everything for you. We'll actually come out to your car and meet you to get the keys, because before our technology is installed, we have no way of accessing your car. We'll meet you, we'll walk around the car with you, we'll take the car to get inspected, we'll take the car to get the technology installed, and we'll bring it back to you. So that's part of those 24/7 road assistance, is actually helping our owners even set up, or if you wanted to remove your car, same thing. We still don't make you take it anywhere. We come and pick it up from you and get everything installed or deinstalled.
Do the owners have to predetermine when they can list their car, or how much in advance? If I decide, I'm sitting around, maybe I'll want to put it on there. How does that work?
Okay, yeah, great question. So in terms of the availability, our system works so it's available unless you say it's not available as the owner. And so there's two ways to say it's not available as the owner. One way is you can have recurring blocks. So let's say you use your car every Sunday to visit your grandparents in the suburbs from 1 till 5. You can have a recurring block in Getaround that says, I don't ever want my car rented from 1 to 5 on Sundays. And that goes on forever. Or you can also have ad hoc blocks. So let's say you're sitting here right now, your car is hopefully maybe one day going to be shared on Getaround, and you decide right now that you want to go on a date tonight or go to the movies. As long as the car's not already rented, you can just go on your phone and block off the availability. And so when you have blocks, it will prevent cars from being rented anytime the block's going on.
Sure. So I have two specific questions. The first one is, what about if I have a manual car? Do you have people that have those? I mean, is that a problem?
No, it's not a problem. We do have manual cars. To be totally honest with you, they generally don't do as well as automatic.
Sure.
Because it's a subset of the population that can drive them, but it's not a problem, no.
Okay, yeah, you don't have people showing up thinking it's automatic and then having to cancel or anything.
I can't say it's never happened, but it's very clear on the app that it's manual. In fact, when you're about to check out of a manual car, which I nearly did about a month ago, it reminds you that it's a manual car, so I saw it right at the last step. But also, you can always filter in the app or on your computer to say you only want to see automatic cars.
Okay. And then the other question would be, I'm in a parking garage normally, so how does that usually work?
So it depends. Parking garages come in all shapes and sizes. And so if the public garage has public access, then it's very easy. People can get in anyways, so they can get in to rent your car.
It's private residential.
So private residential, it also depends on how the garage is. Sometimes people can set up with their doorman, if it's doorman building, to have the doorman let people in if they say they have a Getaround rental. Sometimes they can even show the doorman the screen they've rented out the car. Actually, the first time I ever rented a Getaround car, which was before I worked for the company, I had a system where I had to show the doorman my picture and give them the name of the car, and then they let me into the building. The other thing is certain garages, just to cover like at least the most popular cases, let's pretend you had a garage like in an alleyway in Lakeview where it might be a personal garage, but you don't want to give someone your key. You can have a lockbox that we can actually get for you and set it up with a passcode that only gets sent to the renter once they book your car. And you have the ability to change what that passcode is, including in the description, so that they don't have the access code all the time. So that's like generally, unfortunately, you kind of have to discuss it on case by case because everything's so different. If you have specific questions, I'm happy to discuss later. But in general, that's how it works.
No, I just asked the question in general because you're in a city, you deal with a lot of those situations. Of course,
Yeah,
my wife
totally.
has another question. She says, what about parking tickets or if you get towed, for example, while you're using a Getaround car?
Okay, so two scenarios here. The first scenario is you rent my car, not saying you would do this, and you park in an illegal spot and the car gets towed. So what would happen is the car would get towed, you would call Getaround, and we would go have someone get the car out, but as the renter, you're responsible if the car gets towed while you're driving it. And so you would be charged up to $750 for fees if it gets towed or impounded or anything like that. Additionally, especially for street parking spots, renters are responsible to park in a space that's not going to get a ticket for at least 24 hours. So for example, my car is being returned to me, it's actively rented out right now, before I'm home from work. So if they parked, for example, in a tow zone, I wouldn't be able to get to it in time to move it. So if a ticket occurs, let's say for street sweeping, which is the most common one, if someone parked in a street sweeping spot and they saw it and it was less than 24 hours, the renter will actually be charged for the ticket. The owner in that situation would pay the ticket, because we need to make sure they pay it, and send it to us, and we would reimburse them plus $15 for the inconvenience fee that they had to deal with the ticket.
So we have some that have come in digitally here. How do tolls work?
Okay, so tolls, we have a very cool system called auto toll. Without getting technical, it's set up in the back end, but for the vast majority of states in Chicago, states in the United States, you can drive through any toll with a car without iPass or without Easy Pass, and it will automatically charge by the license plate, and then we'll charge you after the fact for any tolls you went through that occurred during your trip. Because when the tolls come into us, we match them up by time and by car, because we have the license plate and we know when you had the car. And so we're able to charge them after the fact. And in fact, if owners have cars, if I want to have my car and take it through a toll booth, they'll just charge me at the end of the month also. So that's how tolls work.
How is gas handled on Getaround?
Good question. So gas is the responsibility of the renter. The renters in today's world, and I'll tell you where it's going to go, have to pay for gas. So what we do is we ask owners to keep the tank full, because that's the easiest way for renters to know how much gas they used. And at the end of the trip, the renter fills up the tank, and we're all good. If, and this happens, as a car owner, I can tell you sometimes, not always, actually not, it's rare, it doesn't happen often, but it happens, where renters won't fill up the tank, what we do is the owner actually goes to fill up the tank themselves and sends us a receipt. What we do is we charge the renter that didn't fill up the tank for the gas they didn't use, for gas they didn't fill up, and we give the owner $10 extra for the inconvenience of having to fill up their tank. Now, this is not a great system. It's a system we have now. We're still a pretty young startup. In the future, we'll have a much better system whereby, because we have a device in the car, that's allowing you to open and unlock the doors. It also tracks GPS. So not only do you know how far you were going, we know how fast you were going. We'll be able to charge you based on the market rate. We're not going to profit off of this. Based on just the gas you used. Because if you go a few miles, let's say 10, 15 miles, that might be, depending on the car you have, 3/4 of a tank of a gallon or a gallon of gas. You don't really want to fill that up. And trust me, as an owner, the owners don't want to fill the gas up for you. So we'll be able to charge you just for what you used, and then we'll have a credit card in the car, just like Zipcar, and if the gas drops below 1/4 of a tank, we'll ask you to go fill up the tank with our credit card, just as being a part of the community, and you'll only get charged again for the gas you used. This will help because this will be a big help on both the renter and owner side. I can't say when it's going to be ready. I would hope through the first half of 2017. But for any of you that have worked with developers before, you know that sometimes things get delayed and they come in over budget. And so don't quote me on that.
What types of cars have you seen that are most successful on Getaround?
So in Chicago, I would say the most successful cars are compact sedans, basically, or just sedans. So your Toyota Corollas, your Ford Fusions, your Ford Focuses, those generally get rented out the most because they go for a lower price than, for example, a fancy BMW or an Audi convertible or even a Ford Mustang, which go for higher rates. So a lot of people are looking for just a car that gets them from point A to B, and those kind of more standard. My car is Toyota Corolla. They do quite well on the site. You also, though, have some other types of cars that do well, especially certain times of the year and certain times of the month. So pickup trucks, for example, really do well at the beginning and the ends of the months when people are moving, as do like the bigger white vans that you can rent. In the summer, convertibles do a lot better than in the winter. And also SUVs will do better in the winter than they'll do in the summer because people are willing to pay a little more to have a vehicle that's going to do better in the snow. In San Francisco, where we have tons and tons of data, and I assume this will be around the same in Chicago, the most popular cars by far are Priuses because they get great gas miles and they're relatively inexpensive. Smart cars, believe it or not, because they're very cheap. You can rent most smart cars in San Francisco for $5 an hour. And in San Francisco, and this might be a little different in Chicago, Audi A3s are also incredibly popular. In San Francisco, I think people care generally about what they're driving a little bit more than in Chicago. I think that plays into it. But it's also, as far as luxury cars go, on the cheaper end, it's a lot cheaper, for example, than renting a Tesla or a Porsche. So I think that's why they're so popular there.
Great. Do we have any other questions in the audience? Okay, well, thank you very much, Brian. This has been excellent. He'll stay around afterwards to answer any questions people might have personally. Let's give him a round of applause.
Yeah, so definitely happy to talk now or in the future. I have business cards up here. My email is pretty easy. It's Brian with an I, so BRIN @getaround.com. And feel free to reach out if you have questions, ideas, suggestions. We're growing this market, and we're always eager to hear from you guys.
We have plenty of food left over. I'll put these containers back there. Please take as much as you want. Thank you.